everybody. It's good to see so many folks with us this morning. Today if you miss what I say in this talk, the main point I'm trying to get across here is that in what Zen teaches is not so much about what we believe, but how we live our life. And one of the central teachings that I really want to emphasize today is that we have more than we need to accomplish our goals. We don't need to go out and get something extra. We don't need to go out and buy something. You don't need to buy a zafu, a meditation cushion for your personal home practice. You have everything that you absolutely need to practice the Dharma where you are. And so that's the main emphasis of this particular talk. And I'd like to offer some context. I'd like to offer a little bit about my teacher's teacher, my grandfather teacher, share a little bit about his history, and connect it to that particular teaching through his life example. In 2002, I had a good opportunity to, this was before I became a Zen priest. I was living with my teacher at that time, and my teacher took our Sangha to Japan to celebrate the 750th anniversary of Zen Master Dogen's passing away. That was in 2002. And Noda Daito Roshi was present at that time. That's my teacher's teacher. So I had another unique opportunity to witness how my teacher was with her teacher. It was not something I saw before. And in Zen, we really benefit from seeing examples of how people or how teachers conduct themselves around other teachers and their teachers. That's a wonderful way to learn about how to be with your own teacher. And so I witnessed that, but also I heard the way that he spoke, and he spoke so highly of several Japanese teachers that came to the United States at that time. He was giving a talk to a room full of about 100 Westerners, people from both America and the United States. And he called out Katagiri Roshi's name. Right? So he knew of Katagiri Roshi's work, but he himself didn't know any English. I don't think at that time he'd ever been to the United States. And so the Dharma came to my teacher not through a Japanese Zen teacher that came to the United States, but because my teacher was living in Japan, learned Japanese, and found her teacher in Japan. And one of the things that my teacher mentioned there when it was her turn to speak was that 50 years ago, this kind of interaction between Westerners and Japanese would never have happened. And that was because if you go subtract 50 from 2002, it was 1952, 700 years after. That's when they would have done that ceremony previously. So these ceremonies for marking Dogen's memorial or Zen Master Keizan's memorial, they only happen now every 50 years. So maybe you get one chance in a lifetime to do them or to be a part of them. And they really pull out all the stops in Japan for these special ceremonies. And if you think back to 1952, what was going on in the world at that time? Japan was just coming out of World War II, and they were in a reconstruction process. And so there was very little interaction at that time of Westerners that had contact with Buddhism or Zen Buddhism in particular, maybe some scholars here and there, but certainly not to the extent that we see it today. And so it's in large part thanks to post World War II that we Westerners have been able to benefit from teachings within Zen Buddhism. And I can't help but continue to return to studying some of these teachers and how they lived their life and use Zen teachings to help them as an example for us also to learn from. So in the case of Noda Daito Roshi, his family were pre-World War II. They moved to Manchuria. And I'm just learning some of this history now. My teacher had told me this many years ago, and I didn't quite grasp the scope of what that meant then, that his family had resided in Manchuria. So if you know a little bit of world history, this was a big movement on the part of the Japanese in its process of becoming a world empire. They colonized a chunk of China called Manchuria. And one of the things that they did in that process of colonization, as a means to maintain and stabilize that land area, I don't know if conscript is the right word, but many poor rural tenant farmers were encouraged, or maybe conscripted in some sense, to go to Manchuria to live, because there was a crisis going on in Japan at that time amongst the rural tenant farmers. They were very poor, and I don't know the extent of that particular, what was happening at that time pre-World War II, to understand the scope of it. It's something that I'm interested in and in the process of learning at present. But in any case, his family, his mother and father, they made the decision to move from Japan, where they were in a poor mountainous region of Japan. Well, that's not saying a lot because all of Japan is mountainous. But they literally lived on the side of a mountain. And that's not the case for much of Japan. Not many people do that. They went to Manchuria, and apparently they were amongst millions of other Japanese tenant farmers doing the same thing. And they went to a part of Manchuria that was considered the boondocks. So not populated at all. And this is secondhand, or maybe even third hand, through my teacher, who heard this from her teacher's mother, that she said when they were in Manchuria that they had so much open land, so much open space. And you can imagine from a Japanese perspective, where the population was highly dense, how that would have been to people coming to an area where there's hardly any people anywhere. And she said it was so underpopulated that you could ride for miles naked on a horse and nobody would see you. That's how she described it. And that's, again, this is third hand, so hopefully that's accurate. The other thing is to keep in mind the historical context is that Japan, pre-World War II, saw itself as a rising world power. And it was doing exactly what European, and it was learning from European and America how to do that. How do you do that? You take over another land. They were following suit. Well, America could do it. The Europeans, they're colonizing Africa. Why don't we do it? That's how you do it, right? So, sometimes people get a little bit like can come down negatively on Japan about that, but it also forces us to look at, Westerners to look at how how we acquired what we did here as well. And Japan was just doing the same thing, and ultimately they ended up losing Manchuria. After World War II, when they lost the war, Daito Roshi's family they were forced back to Japan. So they were probably, again, I'm going to ask my teacher more about this, but they were probably living in Manchuria maybe a decade or so. And Noda Daito Roshi was probably around 4 years old when they returned to, 4, 5, 6 years old when they returned to Japan. And they returned to Japan with absolutely nothing but the shirts on their backs. And they had to figure out how to make a living. Right there, that's something like, how do you do that? You left everything with this desire to make your way in a foreign country. And then after a decade or more of time, putting your roots down in this new space, thinking you're going to be safe and protected and have the backing of your nation, well, then you lose it all. And then you're forced back to where you started. And all they had then was this land that wasn't growing very much and the shirts on their back. And Daito Roshi was the oldest of 5 children. So his parents had 5 children, and they were so poor they couldn't bring up the fifth child. He was sent to the United States, and an American family apparently brought him up. And Daito Roshi, being the oldest, the oldest of 5, he had a lot of responsibility to take care of his siblings. So as the story goes, there's probably a lot more in there between his growing up and taking care of these kids and him becoming a businessman. So in his early 20s, he was self-educated, he studied acupuncture, and he had just begun a practice of acupuncture by the time he was in his maybe mid-20s, early 20s is my guess. And at one point, and early in his acupuncture career, he had done a acupuncture work on a man who was in very poor health, and the man died shortly after the acupuncture treatment. And Daito Roshi was mortified. He thought that his treatment itself had killed the man, and he was so bereft. He didn't know what to do. So he did with what a lot of people do when they don't know what to do. He went to a bar. Right? He went to the bar, and he happened to find at that bar, guess who? A Zen priest. And the priest happened to be Dashin McCabe Daosho, whom I talked about last month. And he sat down next to that priest, and he started telling him his problems, and he started drinking his sake. And he said to Dashin McCabe at one point, he said, maybe I should be a Buddhist priest to atone for my sins. That's how he was thinking at that time, because he didn't know whether he thought that man had truly died because of him. And Dashin McCabe, he said, no, well, wait, you don't know if you actually killed him or not. Wait for the autopsy and see. So he did, and the autopsy turned out to be other reasons for the man's death. So it exonerated Noda Daito Roshi from his feelings, yet he said, that was the kick in the pants that I needed in order to get on the path. Right? In order to take my life, to do what I needed to do, I needed to feel that sense of urgency. I felt it. I got the message from the universe, and now, I mean, these are my words, but he got the message that this is the path that he needed to do. And so he did it, even though he was exonerated, right? A lot of people would think, okay, I don't have to worry about this anymore. I'll go back to life as usual. It's kind of like COVID, right? We experienced some serious isolation during COVID, some serious time for reflection during COVID. We had to reorganize the way that we did our life. A lot of things went online. We had to think seriously whether we wanted to continue the work that we were doing or not, or if we could find something else more viable. And then COVID, the window on that closed, and a lot of people just went back to life as usual. But some people took that COVID message really seriously, and they changed the way they did things. So it's totally applicable for us today too. When we have a period where we're really up against a fire, that can help clarify for us our values, what we really are about, what we want to do. So it's just something to think about, you know. It's helpful. I think it can be helpful for us to think back about how things were during COVID. And if we could live differently, how would we do that? In any case, Daito Roshi, he said that was the kick in the pants that I needed to get on the path. And so he resumed his connection with Daishin Shinbi, and he began training. He went to the head temple of Soto Zen in Japan, Eiheiji. He practiced there maybe for a couple of years between there and I believe it was Zuioji. He practiced there and did the training that he needed to do. And then he came back. So most priests in Japan these days are sons of a father who was a priest. And over the past 2 centuries, since the Meiji Restoration period in 1868, priests were forced to take families and then encouraged strongly, almost through force, to pass the lineage on to their son. Because if they did not do that, the whole family would lose their place of residence, which was the temple. The temple, a Buddhist temple, doesn't belong to a priest. It belongs to the wider community. And the only way a priest could stay at the temple is the only way a family could stay at the temple is if there was a priest that was a member of the family. And so if the priest didn't make their son, or in some cases, rare cases, a daughter, their successor, the family, including the wife, would have to move out. And so there was a lot of pressure, in other words. But Daito Roshi was different in that sense, because he didn't have a temple to go back to. His parents were not priests. They were poor tenant farmers. And they had a piece of land on a side of a mountain where they lived. So when he returned from his training, he went back to the side of a mountain, and he came back to a dilapidated house that was falling in on itself. And he told us a story during one of my teacher's ceremonies, and he came to the United States. He said, the house was falling in on itself. And I was so afraid that a wall would cave in on me while I was sleeping that I dug a hole in the floor, and I made that my bedding. I made that my bed. He said, I felt like I was digging my own grave. And that's where he started out. He dug a hole in the floor, and he put out his bedding there, and he slept in that until he could acquire more things. And he was very ingenious in the way he started to acquire things. He was open to whatever donations came his way. And he started out by going to a department store and doing what's called takuhatsu, which is noble begging, where you go out on the alms rounds and you ring your bell and you wear your cone-shaped hat and you're reciting sutras. And because Buddhism has been in Japanese soil for over 1,000 years, people understand what that means there. They know, okay, that's a monk, and maybe they make a donation, maybe they ignore them. It's just, but it's not uncommon to see a monk or a group of monks going on what's called the alms rounds. And so that's what he did. He would sit it's like once a week or something like that, at the department store outside of it, begging for alms. And that's how people initially knew, oh, there's a monk and there's a temple in this area. And so he could begin to create his local sangha. There was no temple there. And one person donated to him a broken down school bus. Couldn't use it for what its original purpose was. Well, what did Daito Roshi do? He soldered out the seats of the bus, and he used the top rack to store meditation cushions, the zafus, and at the back of the bus, he made an altar. That was his first zendo. It was a white school bus. Right? He put that, and then when he wanted to do ceremony, he'd do it right inside the school bus. That was his zendo. And just as a side story, when my teacher initially met him, she had been practicing at a Rinzai Zen temple in Tokyo at that time. And for reasons I'll explain in another talk, she was looking for a teacher to practice with. And her only idea of Zen temples were these huge, old, fancy temples. If you go to Japan, you see literally there's thousands of temples, and they're old, they're beautiful, they contain a lot of treasure, spiritual treasure and material treasure in them. So when she initially went to who was going to be her teacher's temple, she saw a white school bus on this mountainside, and she peered into the window of it and saw an altar with Bodhidharma at the back of it and zafus on the top rows. That's what she saw. And it dawned on her that you don't need to have a fancy temple to practice in. All you need is a sincere heart. Right? And this goes back to Noda Daito Roshi saying, Hobo Kori Dojo. Right where you walk. Hobo. Right? Walking. Kore, that place is your dojo, is your practice place. Where you walk is where you practice. That's your temple, your dojo. It doesn't have to be a special place. And he lived that. Here he had acquired a school bus, and that he made into his temple, his initial zendo. Then, if that wasn't enough, there was at the foot of the mountain was a soy sauce factory, and they had discarded old soy sauce vats. After the soy sauce vat gets to be a certain age, it's not usable anymore to make soy sauce. But they had these vats were large wooden planks. They were comprised of large wooden planks. And he asked the people there, could I use this wood? And they, of course, were trying to get rid of it. He said, it's garbage. You can use it. So he carried the planks, these heavy wooden planks, up the mountain one by one at first. And he created huts. And when I was there, I visited Kappa Dojo. I visited there, and sure enough, when I went there, there was about 8 or 10 of these huts. I think he got rid of most of them now. But that was where my teacher lived for the first 15 months of her practice. When she went to ordain with him, that was where she was going to live. It was like a kuti, a circular, a small circular little hut, 6 foot diameter with a braided circular rug at the bottom with a concrete base, braided rug over top. He cut out a door and a window out of this converted soy sauce vat, and he made a roof to go on, a simple tin roof to go on top. And my teacher, she dug her own bathroom. She dug her own latrine when she was in there. So that was the start of his residence. As he continued to practice in that space and make it into a temple, he acquired more donations, and eventually he built a proper zendo, like you would imagine this place to be, or another like you would imagine in Japan. And I had the good fortune to practice there as well, in the practice in the zendo, beautiful small zendo. It's probably a little bit larger than this room, and then above that zendo is what's called a Dharma hall. So you don't recite the sutras in the same location that you sit zazen. Here we've kind of combined the two. But in Japan, generally, there's one building you go to that's for reciting sutras. There's another one that's for sitting zazen, and there's 7 buildings in total in a proper Zen temple. So he acquired, and that was so over time he acquired the donations needed to make those buildings, to also build a school. And he built a school. He's one of a handful of Buddhist temples. A lot of Buddhist temples in Japan are connected to some kind of a school. But his is unique in that the children that go to his school are ones that can't function at a regular school. They're bullied kids. The problem of bullying is common everywhere, and certainly is pronounced in Japan as well. So these were children that were not able to thrive or succeed in a normal school. And my teacher said that he would teach them how to do martial arts, he would teach them taiko drumming, he would teach them how to fall and get up. He would teach them that it's okay to have scabby knees, that kind of thing. And Daito Roshi was also a Shorinji Kempo master. So I don't know if master is the right word, but he was a practitioner of the Japanese form of Kung Fu. The name Daito Roshi itself, Dai, that's where the Dai from my name comes from, and my teacher's name, means great, and To means flame. And the name of his temple is Kappa Dojo. And for those of you who know a little bit about Japanese folklore, it has a double meaning. Kappa is the name of a mythological sea creature, and we were looking at some videos about the kappa a couple of days ago here. But they're these funny-looking creatures. They're like part turtle, part frog, part bird. They have a beak, and they have this like a bowl for a head, where the bowl carries water. And they're kind of this trickster type creature. And so parents might say to their kids, watch out, if you go down to the river, the kappas live down there, so don't get too close to the water. You don't want to get pulled in by them. All right, so they have that kind of reputation. But if you see a kappa, you could also, they're said to be very powerful, and you can gain their power. How do you gain their power? Guess how? Actually, tricking them. The bowl filled with water, if the bowl gets emptied, then they lose all their powers. And you could empty their bowl by bowing to them. If you bow to a kappa, they have to bow back to you. and then the water drips out of their head. So they lose their power, and then they're under your control. They can be your servant and something. Kind of like the elves in Harry Potter. You know, you get, what was his name? What was that elf's name?
Dobby.
Dobby, yeah, Dobby the house elf. If you free them, they'll work for you. Oh. So today, and I went to Kappa Dojo. The second meaning of Kappa, actually, if you look at the Chinese characters themselves, it's also a play with words too. The first kanji is for katsu. And for those of you familiar with the Rinzai Zen tradition, that's a famous word, which means it's the shout of Zen Master Rinzai. Zen Master Rinzai was the teacher who was famous for enlightening his students by shouting at them and just yelling "Kats." So if a student was doing something delusional, "Kats," he would use "Kats," wake him up. So that's the first character, Kats. And the second one is to break Kats. So and when my teachers, Rinzai Zen master, saw the name of the temple, he said, oh, there was some tension there. You could tell that he didn't like it. Because it's kind of an affront to the Rinzai school. It's like breaking what Master Rinzai did to wake people up. Today, he has an extensive garden. So he turned that soil into something productive. He has a really extensive, people go there to farm. And he has a cafe that he's built on it too, as another source of revenue. So he's managed to make lemonade out of lemons. And he's extraordinarily resourceful. He's backed down quite a bit from teaching there. And his son, who also I've met, and he came to our temple in Pennsylvania, has taken over the leadership of that temple. But it's there, and the main point here is that we don't need to get something, right, in order to be successful, in order to meet our goals. We need to work and look at what we've got already and take care of that, and use it to the best of our abilities. Whatever we have, and things we may receive things too, and that's also to our benefit, and we can learn to use what we receive. So that's a central teaching of Zen. It's not about what you believe. It's about learning to see that you have everything that you need in order to be successful at what you want to do, whether it's Zen practice or something else. Right? We're not all meant to be Zen Buddhist priests and make temples, but the principle still applies in other parts of our life. Right? Just as Noda Roshi, he used this. He came back from Manchuria, China, with shirts on their back. He had to take care of his siblings. He had to educate himself, putting himself through school and learning acupuncture, and that ended up not working. And then failing, thinking he killed somebody, but then using that sense of remorse. That sense of remorse is very powerful, and that's one of the three gates that my teacher says is a gateway to Zen practice. Remorsefulness is one of them, right? We've done something that we regret, even if it's not, like in Daito Roshi's case. He actually was exonerated from that. But still, remorsefulness, repentance, that is a deep gateway into practice. It gets ourselves clearer on what our mission is. So whatever your mission is in life, get clear about it. Get clear what your mission is, and then know that you have what it takes to accomplish it. Look at what you got. That's what we do. If you want to know where your treasure is, that's what my teacher would say, you got to roll up your sleeves and dig into your trash. And that's the garbage, right? And that's the symbol for Buddhism as well. The lotus doesn't bloom outside of the mud that's underneath. And all of us have plenty of mud to work with. You don't need more mud. You just need to work with that mud and face it head on, right? That's our practice. And when we sit in zazen, guess what happens? That mud kind of sometimes smacks us in the, we get a muddy face. And if you sit for a session like we're doing next month, you'll really get to see that mud come up. And that's a good thing. We want the mud. We want to know what our mud is. Those are our resources. That's the raw material we have to work with. All right. So don't be afraid of losing everything. You still have more than you think. Thank you.
Thank you, Dashin.
All right. Not sure. How are we doing on time here?
11:30.
Well, if there's any pressing questions, then maybe we can do a couple, but then let's close it. I don't want to keep people more than they need to, and if you need to go, please feel free.
Is Nidodoko still alive?
He is, yeah. In fact, I just, it's customary to send your teachers a New Year's greeting, and I just did that about a week ago, and I got to think about something to send him. He's going to be sending me a Zen calendar from Japan. It's probably arrived by now, and so we still stay in touch. And you can find Kappa Dojo online. I'm not sure if they have a website. If they do, it's not easily found, but you can find them more easily on Facebook. Yeah, Kappa Dojo. Yeah. And he has written a couple of books, but unfortunately they're not translated. It's unfortunate. I'd love to see more of his writing and look at it, but last time I talked, I shared some of the kanji from a quote of his from one of the books that he had wrote. I think it was the intro to. But he's not very well known in the United States because he didn't do anything, other than through my teacher, who's not very well known either, outside of Zen circles, anyways. But he received an award by the Soto Shu in Japan for starting his own temple, because that's a rare and it's a very uncommon thing to have done in modern times, to start your own temple. Yeah. All right. Shall we?
Yeah, let's do that. The place is pretty crowded, so. Though nobody has their sutra books. Do we all have our sutra books, or
I think that we collected them.
collected them already? So we'll have to stick to Laura's. Yeah, we'll do it.
May our intention equally penetrate every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way.
Beings are numberless. I vow to freedom. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it.
Thank you, everybody, for your practice being here this morning, and please we'll exit here, put back your cushions, and enjoy some tea and conversation or coffee, whatever you like.
We have a potluck.
That's right. I forgot to mention Shinkyu is heading out today, or not today, but this coming week. This is our last opportunity for most of us to be with Shinkyu, who's been such a huge service to us at Nebraska Zen Center. So I just want to also take you guys, I've thanked him already a lot of times this weekend. You guys get to do that too. Really make sure you see him. He's going to be doing some awesome training ahead of him. He's going to Shasta Abbey in another month?
About a week and a half.
Oh,
Maybe
no.
2 weeks.
In a couple of weeks, he's going to flying to California to practice at a foot of a different mountain, and then to San Francisco Zen Center for a few months, and then the future is a big question mark for him. But he's going to be doing some really great training in a monastic setting here, and we want to send him off with our blessings. It's not easy to practice in a monastic setting. So we want him to wish him great success in that, and just really, I want to just say thank you so much for all you've done to kind of hold Nebraska Zen Center, the space here for everybody, and so welcoming to people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So he's been such a resource and treasure, a real Dharma treasure for us. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.